let's talk about customer cash deposits. This is a big one that you wanted to talk about, Martin. Why don't you give some context for us?
Well, it would fit if you're doing WIP and a whole lot of things correctly, it might cover this, but as a separate subject, it happens all the time. People get
Hmm.
deposits. It might be 10%, might be 30%, might be $5,000, might be $50,000. And what they do with it is give it to their bookkeeper who puts it in the bank and maybe writes an invoice and receives it against the invoice and becomes part of sales. And the problem with that is the fact that you received a deposit is not
Right.
sales. I mean, it's going to turn into sales at the point that you've earned it. So it overstates. It's just further complication. This is all goes together in matching. Like, but I see it all the time, and it's basically what happened with the guy I was talking about earlier, who made 49% to the bottom line. He just got
Yep.
deposits, right? Put them in sales. Woohoo! Had a great year. Well, he's not going to be happy
Yeah.
next year unless he repeats it at a higher level. So,
Yeah.
where should deposits
Yeah.
go?
So, I mean, you're
Jason?
exactly right, Martin, that if you're producing a good WIP report, it should flesh this out from a job profitability perspective. But deposits are basically a liability, because you haven't earned that cash yet. So it's not appropriate to be calling that revenue until you've really earned that by performing the job. And so the deposit will be earned when the job is done. Depends on how you bill. Maybe earned up front, maybe the deposit, maybe at the end, there's some deposit that you have to return at some point. But the deposit initially goes on the balance sheet. And I know the balance sheet can be a scary thing, but what I will say is that if the balance sheet is not accurate, your profit and loss or your income statement is not accurate. And those two things go hand in hand. So if you're just looking at your income statement and saying, "Hey, look at here's my numbers," and you say, "Well, I don't know how the balance sheet works. I don't understand that." There's big risk that again, your income statement may not be accurate. To Martin's point, as an example, if you put deposits in revenue, your revenue is overstated, and deposits really should be on the balance sheet as a liability to the company because you haven't earned that yet. And that's the biggest point is revenue should be what you've earned and done the work on and completed. And the cost of performing that work should both be recorded in the same period, so in the same month. And if you're doing that consistently, you have consistency across the months of the business and the years of the business. You can see trends. You can see what your margins are. You can start to make decisions to improve those margins. And then when you have discussions with a third party, not only somebody like Martin, but a third party like a potential new investor or partner or a banking relationship,
A
bonding
bonding
company.
company.
I was going to say that.
What's the
Bonding
first
company,
thing that
absolutely.
all of those individuals are going to ask for? Let me see your financials, right? And if you're hitting print on QuickBooks and you're sending that out, you're giving them, that's the story you're giving them. So it's better to control the story, make sure you have good information, make sure it's credible, make sure it's in a good format that tells the right story of the business and makes you look credible at the same time. And that in and of itself, and having that knowledge base and be able to speak to financials, it's amazing how much easier it is to get capital in that situation versus I'm trying to get financing of some level or the bonding company and, oh, I have a bookkeeper. You go, here, talk to my bookkeeper. They'll help you. 9 times out of 10, you're not going to get the result you need or want.
Right.
And I want to go through a really quick scenario of the cash deposits. Like, let's just play it out, right? So let's say we are a home builder and we think that it's going to take us 7 months, or maybe let's use the easier number, 6 months to finish building this custom home. And we get a cash deposit for 50% upfront. What's the best way to handle that?
Yep. So you take that, you put the money in the bank, which is great. But you also have to understand that's not my money. So the first thing is there's a couple of things. One, you have to be able to manage your cash effectively. If you say, hey, I got extra cash, I'm going to bonus everybody out, or I'm going to take some and I'm going to buy a new car or something like that. Well, you're setting yourself up for trouble later because you have to use that cash to perform on the job, right? So cash management is the number one. That's number one critical component there. The second is you take that money, you put it in the bank, and you put it on the balance sheet as a customer deposit liability. So your income statement is still all zeros. There's no revenue, there's no expenses yet, assuming that you have nothing else going on in your business. So you take the money, you put it on the balance sheet, you put it in cash, and it's a liability. Now, the first month when I start working on the engagement, I may be able to apply some of that deposit and move that from the liability over to revenue based on the amount of work I've performed. Sorry, go ahead, Bert. Yeah,
The whip
right.
report.
Yeah,
No,
based on the whip report, right? So now I have developed a whip report, and based on the whip report, I know how much revenue or what my costs incurred were. I know the percentage complete that I am on the engagement, and I can calculate the revenue. And so there, at that point, I can move over some of those funds from the liability over to revenue. The costs then that were incurred are also in that month. And now you have a true picture of what happened that month as far as profitability on the engagement. And you can also it helps you to manage cash flow. Cash flow can be managed separately, obviously, but especially in businesses, what we see all the time is cash management is critical. But now you have a good representation and your financials are a true picture of what's really happening here.
Yeah.
No. Okay. That's super helpful. And then when is it, how does it change as I finish the job? Anything need to be changed as we finish out and close out the project?
So when you close out the project, obviously you need to make sure if you have any excess deposit, it gets returned or paid back. That does not impact your profitability on the job. That's just simply returning a deposit, right? So it's not an expense to the company. You've already recorded all the expenses associated with the job. If sometimes there may be some true ups, you're estimating the cost to complete percentage throughout the job. When you get to the end, you may be a little bit off. Hopefully you're as accurate as possible. But when the job is final, you true it up at that point. But because you're managing that on a monthly basis, the true up should be nominal. And because you're managing that effectively on the WIP report, any adjustments throughout the job and what changes are happening, you're managing that. And so you true up the job, you make sure that your invoicing is set up appropriately, that you've invoiced for any amounts that are left over, or if you've received any cash in advance or in excess of what the job costs or job revenue should be, you have to pay that back. But none of that really impacts or should impact the income statement, right? So that's all kind of on the side. That's all part of the balance sheet. The income and the profitability and the cost of the job are very consistent month over month based on what you see happening. And the flow of cash has no impact on the revenue and the expenses of the job.